Well, let's go straight to Kyiv now with our correspondent Gulliver Cragg to unpack some latest developments. Ukraine's defense minister, Gulliver Denis Shmyhal, says that the country will need at least $120 billion for defense for 2026. Defense spending making up 31% of GDP. Now, much of that is going towards drone manufacturing, as that report just mentioned. But just how expensive is it for Ukraine currently to maintain its war effort?
Well, officially, spending on defence this year, 2025, is around $53 billion. So this figure of $120 billion, more than double that, is a significant increase. And partly that must be due to the Ukrainians' policy of always asking for more than what they really need, because they know that they're not going to get everything they ask for, so they set the bar higher than what they really need. But the fact is, the war is getting a lot more expensive because mainly the Russians have got so many more drones and also an increased number of long-range rockets and missiles with which they are targeting Ukraine. And in order to counter them, Ukraine needs that many more drones and other air defense capabilities. And even if the Ukrainians have developed these interceptor drones mentioned in the report we just saw that only cost about $1,000 each, they're going to need so many of them, and you need at least two. There's got a 50% success rate at best, often less than that, so they need really an awful lot of them. That's one of the things they need to spend money on. Frontline drones as well, FPV drones with short range for continuing the battle on the front lines. The Russians have got millions of them. The Ukrainians at the moment have got the capacity to actually produce in Ukraine 60% more than the government can afford to pay for. The Ukrainian government can't afford to pay its own manufacturers to produce the drones that they've got the capacity to make and which are needed on the battlefield. So that's one of the reasons they're asking for so much more money. Another reason is that they've still got this huge recruitment problem. They don't have enough people, and clearly offering higher salaries to soldiers would be one way to try to recruit more of them. So Ukraine is once again asking for more financial aid from its partners. There's also a debate raging at the moment in this country about arms exports, and this question about European countries now being very interested in these interceptor drones is going to be an interesting one to follow, because a lot of Ukrainian arms manufacturers are saying if only it were easier for us to export in large quantities our produce, we'd be bringing in huge revenues which could be reinvested in Ukraine's own defense effort.
Perhaps a venue there for financing. But Gulliver, nonetheless, Ukraine is still using its drones, and to quite strong effect today. They targeted another one of Russia's largest oil refineries. It was the Bashneft facility on the outskirts of Ufa in central Russia. And this isn't a new thing. Ukraine has really been targeting these Russian oil refineries. Does Kyiv believe that this is the quickest way to cripple the Russian army?
Yes, I think that this site is about 1,400 kilometres east of the Ukrainian border, and that doesn't make it the furthest that they've flown. They've flown 2,000 kilometres or more, but it's still, underscoring the fact that they're able to target Russian facilities further and further away from Ukraine. And they say, the Ukrainians, that they have now got to a situation where about 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity is either completely out of commission or operating at reduced capacity. And this is not just having an effect on the Russian armed forces. I think that they feel that the effect on the Russian armed forces is not yet as impressive as they hope it will be if they manage to destroy a little bit more of that capacity, but it's having an effect on Russian civilians. There are huge queues at petrol stations in Russia. In some regions, they can't get enough petrol, and so that affects the economy. And Ukrainians hope it makes Russians realize a little bit more that the war is actually going on, that it affects them, and that they might start asking more questions about why they're even doing this.
A final question, Gulliver. On Friday, Donald Trump, he released this truth post, this Truth Social post. We're going to see it on our screens now, calling on NATO allies to halt Russian oil purchases and punish the likes of China and India by putting sanctions on those countries for bringing in Russian oil. But how likely is this to happen, and what kind of pressure can this really put on these countries that will work in Ukraine's favor?
Well, you know, I've spent the last couple of days at this YES conference, YES. It's an annual event, conference that brings in all sorts of leading politicians, a lot of former prime ministers, and also leading intellectuals and historians. And Neil Ferguson, the historian, was commenting on that this afternoon, and he was really trying to hammer home the message to everyone at the conference that Trump is not supporting Ukraine and that we really have to stop thinking that there is going to be anything really useful coming out of this Trump administration. And he held these statements today up as the latest example, because in Neil Ferguson's analysis, which I think is shared by a lot of commentators, this is basically Trump's way of getting out of imposing further US sanctions on Russia, because he also said in that same statement that NATO countries should impose tariffs of 50 to 100% on China. And he knows that these countries have got huge amounts of trade with China, that it's extremely important to their economies, and it's absolutely not financially possible for them to do that. So telling them that he wants them to do that before he's going to start really strengthening the US sanctions regime against Russia is just a way of saying that he's not going to do it.
A fascinating analysis as always. Gulliver Cragg, thank you so much coming to us from Ukraine.